Well, good afternoon. I'm Father David. Thank you for joining me today for Disciple Time as we're moving into the fifth week of Lent. And I am going to be looking at the optional gospel readings today as I talk about this. But before I do, I just want to share a story of when I lived in Florida. And one of the things my family loved to do was to go to SeaWorld. Back in those days, one of our favorite shows was the Shamu Show. And in this show, it was awesome because back then, they actually allowed the trainers to swim with the whales. And one of the most spectacular things you could see was the trainer standing on the nose of the whale and the whale diving down really deep into the pool and then coming up and throwing the trainer into the air, and the trainer would do flips and do a dive and stuff like that. And let me tell you, they were really high flying when those killer whales tossed them. So my kids used to love to watch this, and they always wanted to go down, to that splash zone where they could get wet. But, we kind of tried to keep them up where we didn't have to get too wet. And on one of those occasions, as we gathered outside the stadium to get ready to go in, when the gates opened, we were standing by one of those fountains where the water kind of jumps around, and the kids were looking at that, and the crowd was huge. So Lael was on one side, I was on the other, and when the gates opened, we all kind of started moving inside. And this picture right here of me and Garrett and Gabe is actually one we took on this day. And as we were getting to the seats, Lael noticed that Garrett was not with me, and I noticed that Garrett was not with her. And so we both kind of had a panic attack. All the worst things were going through our minds. We were at an amusement park. Our little boy was gone. And so we frantically searched around the stadium area. I thought she was with him. She thought he was with me. And this went on for about 10 minutes of us kind of looking around, trying to find him. And I can't even describe the feelings that we kind of felt in that moment, but you could probably imagine. But then from the other side of the stadium, a SeaWorld worker came over to us with a very distraught little Garrett. And I can't begin to tell you how relieved we were either when we saw him coming up to us. And so I can definitely relate to the readings today, these alternate readings where Mary and Joseph in today's reading with Jesus as a kid, are in Jerusalem, and they're about to leave Jerusalem. And this is the day that Jesus decides he's going to kind of leave the family and go into the temple and kind of have this moment in the temple, right? And so we read here in Luke 2:45 through 47, when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. And after 3 days, they found him, and he was in the temple court, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. Well, today is the solemnity of St. Joseph. And so I was kind of thinking about just poor Joseph, right? Being a dad in this scenario and having your kid missing like that. And I mean, think about it, right? So Joseph's mission given to him by the angel himself was to nurture Christ, to protect Christ while he grew up, to provide for Christ and for Mary. And he knew who Christ was. I mean, it wasn't like he had to guess. He hadn't all of a sudden forgotten that he had almost divorced his wife back when he found out she was pregnant and had all these revelations from the angels about who Jesus was. He hadn't forgotten all that, So he was trying to be the best dad he could. He was trying to provide. And here's, Jesus is just up and missing this time that they go to Jerusalem. And Mary and Joseph, they probably felt in that moment the same way that I felt and Lael felt when Garrett came up missing. And, so I can really relate when they finally get back with Jesus. And the first thing they say, and I'll put this in kind of contemporary English, is, "Son, where have you been? Why would you do this to us? Your father and I have been worried sick." I can just hear Joseph and Mary saying that. And, so what does Jesus have to say for himself in this moment? Basically, in Luke 2:49, he says, "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" And as a dad, having experienced this only to a small degree, when I read this and I thought about Jesus being missing for 3 days, I was like, man, come on, Jesus, right? You know better than to do something like that. For 3 days, your only answer is, "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" I don't know that would fly with me, even knowing who Jesus was and all that. And so it kind of begs the question, right? Why did he do it? Why did he disappear for 3 days? And of course, as I was contemplating this story, I thought about Jonah being swallowed in the whale for 3 days. And, here's Jesus missing for 3 days. And I thought about Jesus' passion when he would, die on the cross and be buried for 3 days and come back to life. And in that 3-day period, right, his disciples and the world kind of got the opportunity to experience what it was like for Christ to be gone, to be unavailable, to be not present with them physically. Now, first, Mary and Joseph experienced this separation, this absence of Christ's physical presence. Then all the disciples during Jesus' passion got to experience it. And that's what makes what Jesus said so powerful, I think. Right? Jesus said, "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? Didn't you know I had to be doing my Father's work?" Right? And the only 2 times that we see Jesus is missing in the New Testament, the only 2 times he's missing, once in the temple, once when he's crucified, he's off accomplishing the work his Father sent him to do. So while he might not be present physically with them, he was still working on their behalf, accomplishing what God had sent him to do. And so the application for me today was, when we're having difficulty perceiving Christ's presence, maybe in our situation, to be comforted, because Christ, when we perceive his absence, he's still at work on our behalf. Isn't that a comforting thought? That even if you can't perceive Christ right now in your situation, he's still active and working on your behalf. Well, thank you for joining me today for week 5 on this solemnity of Joseph. And I love this kind of new AI picture of Joseph. I think that's going to be one of my favorites.